Last spring, Alan and I visited a new place in Somerville called Lair House that had just opened. Lair House describes itself as a Jewish tavern and house of learning. Lair House means house of learning, and its creation was the inspiration of a German Jewish man named Franz Rosenzweig, who was quite assimilated into German culture, not religious at all. But in about 1920, he had a sort of conversion back to Judaism. And he wanted to create a place where culturally assimilated German Jews could go to learn about their religion and heritage. So he created it in Munich, and it lasted for a while. And of course, once the Nazi Party came into power, it was closed. So the Somerville Lair House was founded by a young rabbi and his friend, a journalist, both Jewish, who decided to do a kind of unique mashup of two very old Jewish traditions: the Beit Midrash, or study hall, where people go to study and learn religious texts, and the tavern. In 19th century Eastern Europe, anti-Semitism excluded Jews from most professions, so many became tavern owners. And taverns became these important gathering places for the Jewish community. The founders of Lair House Somerville wanted to do something like that. In a time of rising anti-Semitism in America, in a time of increasing isolation, they wanted to create this vibrant space for gathering with the food and drink of the Jewish diaspora. A place where community is created, not just for Jews, but for anyone who wants to come. Well, Alan and I both love the place, and we've been back a couple of times to have a drink or get something to eat, and usually while we're waiting for seats at the bar or for a table, we spend some time browsing in their vast library of Jewish books. There are classes and lectures almost every night that they're open. For example, today at 5 p.m., you could attend a talk with a rabbi called Exiting the Echo Chamber, the Midwives of Egypt and the Revival of Self. I have no idea, but it sounds interesting. At 7, you could take part in another conversation with another rabbi on non-human metaphors for God in the Jewish tradition. Now, the food and drinks are all kosher, and they all have great names and interesting connections to Jewish history and culture. And the menu has extensive footnotes. They call it a Talmudic menu. So next to the fruity cocktail drink on the drink menu called Tree of Knowledge, there's this note. There are many opinions as to which fruit Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. The prominence of the apple in Western European depictions is most likely due to a mistranslation or a pun, as the words for evil and apple in Latin are very similar. Many say that the fruit was most likely a pomegranate, fig, etrog, which is a lemon-like citrus, or even grapes, which are all fruits that grow in the Middle East. I don't think apples do. So there's fish and chips with Old Bay seasoning on the menu too, which might seem like an odd choice for a Jewish tavern, until we learn that Sephardic Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition first brought fried fish to England. In the 18th century, this now iconic British dish was called fish in the Jewish fashion. And the spice mix known as Old Bay was created in 1939 by a Jewish refugee to America who was trying to rebuild the spice business he had left behind in Frankfurt. Who knew? But my very favorite part of the place is the ticket machine by the door. It's exactly like the ticket machine at the supermarket deli counter. But instead of giving out numbers, this machine gives out tickets in the shape of little rectangles with one of two things printed on them. One rectangle says, "I am only dust and ashes." And the other says, "For my sake, the world was created." And there's a sign above the ticket machine that says, "Take two." I know, I loved these immediately, and I knew I wanted to tell you about them. I loved the paradox of the tickets. I loved the utterly contradictory truth of them. So I tucked the two little rectangles in my purse and promptly forgot about them for a year. But I recently did a purse clean out and found only the dust and ashes ticket. So "For my sake, the world was created" must have fallen out somewhere in the past year, so I have to go back, because I think you really do need both tickets. You need both sides of the equation. But finding the dust and ashes ticket reminded me that I had wanted to tell you about them. So I did a little research on where they came from. And it turns out that the story about every person needing to carry two slips of paper in our pockets is well known in the Jewish tradition, though I'd never heard it. The story is attributed to an 18th century Hasidic rabbi named Rabbi Simcha Bunin. And like with most stories, there are a lot of slightly different versions floating around. And the Jewish theologian Martin Buber's version goes this way. Every person should have two pockets, and in one pocket should be a piece of paper saying, "I'm only dust and ashes." And when one is feeling too proud, we should reach into this pocket and take out this paper and read it. And in the other pocket should be a piece of paper saying, "For my sake, the world was created." And when one is feeling disheartened, we should reach into this pocket and take out this paper and read it. Buber writes, "We are each the joining of two worlds. We are fashioned from clay, but our spirit is the breath of God." Now, the story is a teaching story, of course. It's a story to try to help people find our balance between feelings of self-importance on the one hand and feelings of worthlessness or existential unimportance on the other. It's a story to help us remember both our smallness and our worth, our insignificance and our preciousness, the tiny moment that is our life in the span of time, and our utter singularity. It's a story to help us try to somehow be able to hold both, to know that we are both, we are all. I find it hard to make enough room in myself sometimes for all of this. The writer Anne Lamott puts it this way: "All truth is paradox," she says. "Life is a precious, unfathomably beautiful gift, and it is impossible here. Life is filled with heartbreaking sweetness and beauty, with floods and babies, with acne and Mozart all swirled together." And I think humans are the same kind of paradox. We're such a wild combination of resilience and fragility, of abiding love and resentment, of generosity and crankiness. We have these huge, soft hearts that we so often keep hidden at all costs, as if our softness is the weakness, not our hardness. We are so caring and so selfless, and we do so much to help others, and we also spend our fleeting, precious time playing Candy Crush and watching cat videos. It's hard to know how to live with the paradox, how to live in the paradox. We are enough. Our inherent worth and dignity is not up for negotiation. Our belonging on this planet is not conditional. And most of us could stand to be a little kinder a lot of the time. We are whole and unbroken, and we could all use a little work, a little improvement in the selfishness department or the judgment department or whatever department you know you might need to spend a little more time in. As Anne Lamott also says, I deeply believe God loves us exactly the way we are. And I also deeply believe God loves us too much to let us stay here. So maybe part of knowing that we are both dust and ashes and the world was created for us is to also know without shame that we are a work in progress. Maybe it just means knowing where our North Star is, who we are trying to be, what we are trying to do in this life, and then trying to keep moving in that general direction, even as we know we'll never arrive there. I realize today's actually a good day to talk about dust and ashes, since we're right in the middle of the 40 days of Lent in the Christian calendar. Lent begins with Ash Wednesday, when many people go to church and get ashes painted on their foreheads. The ashes are made from burning the palms left over from the last year's Palm Sunday service. The dried palms are burned into ash, and the ministers or priests rub a tiny amount onto each person's forehead and say something very similar to that first paper ticket. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you will return. So the ashes are a symbol of our mortality and a reminder to be humble in the face of the mysteries of life and death, to remember that we are vulnerable and our time here so limited. The word humility comes from a Latin word, humilitas, which also comes from the word humus, dirt. I did a little research into dirt this week. I learned that humus is the organic matter in soil, which is made in soil. That was an interesting mistake, wasn't it? Sometimes we speak the truth by accident. Humus is the organic matter in soil, which is made up from decaying plants and animals. So humility shares a root with soil, specifically the breakdown of living things, which then gives nutrients to the dirt. So to be humble is to be associated with dirt, to be part of the soil, the earth. In both Christian and Jewish theology, at least in the past, this was seen as something negative. As Martin Buber put it, we are fashioned from clay, but our spirit is the breath of God. And he writes it as if those things are opposed to one another. That being from the dirt and also having this sacredness, this soul, this essence of the holy is part of the contradiction. But I don't think that's true. I think there's another way to think about it. First of all, I think the association of humility with humus is actually theologically wonderful. To be humble is to remember that we all come from this rich, life-giving dirt. We are from the earth. We are of the earth, and we come from the same source. Humility is about remembering our source, our connection to the earth and to each other. I also did a little research into dust this week, and I learned that dust, like dirt, is full of life. Who knew? Dust on Earth generally is made up of particles that come from multiple sources, such as soil lifted by the wind and volcanic eruptions. And in space, dust only becomes visible in its reflection of starlight. So to say that we are dust means that we're part of all of these sources of life from whence that dust came, lava and mud. To say that we are dust is to say we are reflections of starlight. But still, even knowing all of this, even knowing, as Reverend Jamie Yandel puts it, that we have stardust in our veins and planets aligning in our hearts, that we are divinity incarnate and holiness is part of our humus, part of our very being, what are we to do? Where is our North Star? Our lives pass in the blink of an eye. Yesterday, I officiated at the memorial service for a mother of an old high school friend. Betsy was born in the year 1931. She died 20 days past her 93rd birthday. Her life began in the presidency of Herbert Hoover in the early years of the Great Depression. And by the end of her life, she was using email to send her children the stories of her childhood she started writing in her 80s. Over the span of her life, she collected literally hundreds of friends, almost all of whom are now gone. She volunteered for dozens of causes. She loved numerous stray dogs, and she grew beautiful gardens, most of which are long gone. And I found myself grieving during this service, not just for her family, but for the transience of everything, for the impermanence of so much that we spend our lives building and creating. It just was making me so sad. And then 3 of her 6 grandchildren spoke, and each of them spoke so beautifully about what their grandmother had taught them, what she had given to them, how they were carrying not just the stories of her life, but they were carrying her strength, her determination, her goodness. And I realized Betsy is indeed returning to dust and ashes now. She's returned back to that mystery and miracle that she always was, and at the very same time, she is helping to create the world for her children and her grandchildren and for everyone whose life she touched. In this way, I realized she is still here, and she always will be. So maybe we can know again that we are part of that great love which holds us all in sanctuary and always will.